Okay, we can start. 3, 2, 1.
Good evening and a very warm welcome to all. Thank you for joining us for the fourth webinar of the series as a part of Zootopia 2021 Open Design Competition. The Central Zoo Authority, in collaboration with the Atal Innovation Mission Niti Aayog, launched Zootopia 2021 in an attempt to involve the young creative minds of our nation in developing an interpretation center for an Indian zoo. The series of webinars with subject matter experts that commenced on 29th April 2021 have been planned to spread the importance of zoo design and planning in the field of architecture, planning, design, and also communicate the need and importance of a holistic view and a multidisciplinary approach. Today's sessions are dedicated to understanding the synergy of landscape design and zoo design, a sector where one mainly thinks about designing of enclosures and animal habitats. We have a packed session today with four speakers, Professor Deepa Maheshwari and Ms. Priyanka Kanhare Patil from Center for Environment, Planning and Technology, Ms. Anupama Bharti and Ms. Richa Raze from the School of Planning and Architecture. To start the session, I would like to invite Professor Deepa Maheshwari from the Center for Environment, Planning and Technology, who will provide an overview on the importance of zoo design integrated with the concept of landscape architecture and design. Professor Maheshwari is an adjunct professor of the Master's Program in Landscape Faculty of Architecture, Center for Environment, Planning and Technology, University in Ahmedabad. She's also a visiting professor at Navrachna University in Vadodara. She has a master's and a PhD in landscape architecture from SPA Delhi. And after securing an MSc degree in botany from Hindu College of Delhi University, she's a founder member of the Indian Society of Landscape Architects, established in 2003. She has attended several national and international conferences and presented at the US International Council on Monuments and Sites conference held in San Francisco in 2018. In addition to academics and research, she has been a consultant to the Sardar Sarovar Narmada Nigam Limited for various ecological and environmental projects and to the Gandhigram Urban Development Authority for park development projects. She has to her credit several other commercial landscape projects as well. She has been associated with Masters in Landscape Architecture program at the Center for Environment, Planning and Technology since its inception in 1993 and held a position of program chair from 2013 till 2020. She has guided over 200 theses and has been reviewer of PhD theses at the Center for Environment, Planning and Technology, University, JNU, Jamia Millia, and the School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Gauri, for such an elaborate introduction. Shall I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I would like to start by thanking Central Zoo Authority and Atal Innovation Mission, the Niti Aayog, for giving me this opportunity. Zoo. A zoo, short for zoological garden, is a facility in which animals are housed within enclosures, cared for, displayed to the public, and in some cases bred. Central Zoo Authority was established as a statutory body under the Ministry of Environment and Forests by the Government of India in the year 1992. The main objective of this authority is to complement and strengthen the national effort in conservation of the rich biodiversity of the country, particularly the fauna, as per the National Zoo Policy 1988. India is one of the recognized mega-diverse countries of the world, harboring nearly 7 to 8% of the recorded species of the world and representing 4 of the 34 globally identified biodiversity hotspots. So far, over 91,200 species of animals, which is 7.3%, and 45,500 species of plants, which is around 12%, have been documented in the biogeographic regions of the country. There is little awareness among the general public about the role of zoos as centers for conservation of wildlife. It is important for all of us to understand that zoo is a place for endangered species in wild, for use as gene pool, to be used for long-term conservation of the species. Survival of wildlife is dependent on the survival of forests. Forests are also home to millions of species of plants, insects, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Animals are important for the survival of the food chain. They add to the biological diversity of the region and maintain ecological balance. But today, in the rapid development, there is destruction of natural vegetation and habitats owing to urbanization, change in land use, infrastructure development, deforestation, timber harvesting, creation of farmlands, invasive species, grazing pressures, mining and oil gas extraction, etc. All this leads to habitat fragmentation. Due to habitat fragmentation, there is an edge effect. So what is edge effect? Edge effect reduces the amount of suitable habitat remaining in a fragment and reduces the core area that supports certain species which have narrow ecological amplitudes. Ecological amplitude is range of tolerance to different factors. Species unable to adapt to these changes in this environment have no choice but to either migrate to more suitable habitats or face a reduced population, which in some cases could lead to extinction. Habitat fragmentation can affect occupancy, reproduction, inbreeding, or even survival in a particular species. There is simplification of food chains due to habitat destruction, which leads to instability of ecosystem. I'll share with you one example of Gir forest. So this Gir forest is in Gujarat. The area under Gir forest, which is home to lions, has drastically reduced in the past few decades as seen in this drawing. So you can see in 1844, this was the area of Gir forest, which is reduced to only this much. So we can understand what is the need of conservation. Habitat degradation, destruction, and fragmentation leads to threatening the very existence of animals and plants in an area. Thus, there comes a need for conservation. There are two types of conservations: in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. In situ is the conservation and protection of genetic resources of plants and animal species in their natural habitat itself. Examples are national parks, biosphere reserves, parks, and sanctuaries. Whereas ex situ conservation is a conservation of biological diversity outside their natural areas, and examples are zoo, aquarium, seed banks, botanical gardens, etc. Coming to zoo, there are major 5 objectives of the zoo. These are conservation, animal welfare, research, education, and recreation. Design for the zoo. So the process of designing is initiated with site selection. Then there is site analysis, wherein we understand various layers, natural layers like geology, slope, elevation, hydrology, soil, vegetation, land use, history and culture, and the larger context. Overlay of these maps leads to suitability analysis, and from there we come to the zoning, conceptual drawing, leading to a master plan development. In case of zoo, there are these 3 components: animals, humans, and ancillary activities. In ancillary activities like healthcare center, research center, conservation centers, conservation breeding centers, etc. For animals, enclosure is very important. So enclosure design is one of the keys to good zoo design. Enclosures should be sufficiently large to give fullest opportunity for breeding rituals like chasing, dancing, and exploration. Enclosures should have hiding places and privacy for the animals. Enclosures should simulate the natural habitat of the animals housed as closely as possible. And availability and adequate breeding stock with appropriate sex ratio should be ensured. Landscape immersion is a popular design concept of virtually immersing the visitor in the same natural habitat as the animal. Exhibits are designed in which visitors share the same landscape but not the same area with the animals. Then there are other design considerations. for humans, visitors and staff. So circulation, parking, the pathways. Then there are facilities like interpretation center, museum, workshop, kiosk, restroom, and then there are maintenance. Then now from animals perspective. So I'm coming to a concept of happiness quotient. Happiness quotient. So how do we define the happiness quotient for the animals? Zoo is a place for ex situ conservation where animals are kept in captivity. Therefore, we should try to gain a high happiness quotient for them. So when are animals happy? They are happy if their basic health and functioning is in place. They are free from diseases, injury, stress. They have got appropriate nutrition and water. They get biologically appropriate natural life. They feel safe. They live free of fear. And the quality of life is determined by environmental conditions. Therefore, we should choose animals for the zoo as per the phytogeographic zones, which I'm going to explain later, and understand their natural habitat or the bioclimatic zone, the behavior, the needs, design enclosures such that they simulate their natural habitat. And when we design zoo as landscape architects, animals should be our client. Coming to phytogeographic zones of India. India is a country with varied climatic ecozones that house a variety of plant species across the country. The underpinning principles of what grows where lies in the interaction of various natural layers such as elevation, aspect, orientation of landforms, latitude, slope, geology, soil, surface and groundwater hydrology, nearness to sea, along with various components of climate such as temperature, light, humidity, soil moisture, precipitation, and wind. An overlap of these factors gives us planting zones across our country. To arrive at phytogeographic zones, the factors are climate, temperature, precipitation, light, humidity, and wind, and other factors are soil, topography, latitude. Out of the climatic factors, precipitation and temperature are prime factors for zoning. In India, the most important form of precipitation is in the form of rainfall. Both water in the soil as soil moisture and water in the air as humidity are important to the plants. Other important aspect is the distribution of rain, the seasons and patterns, its intensity, duration, and frequency. Parts of our country also receives winter rainfall. Regarding temperature, there are two important things. One is the winter minimum temperature, which goes below zero in certain parts of the country, and the other is average temperature. So based on the temperature and rainfall, the country can be divided into 20 zones. And then they are actually called ecological zones and subzones. Here I am calling them phytogeographic zones that vary from semi-arid, subhumid, humid, and perhumid. These are the ones that contribute to a difference in vegetation type and hence the species composition. India is a country with many landforms such as mountains and valleys, deserts, swamps, fertile plains, coastal areas, plateaus, estuaries, and deltas. Owing to these landforms, there are a number of bioclimatic zones. There is a great variety of soil types throughout the country. Because of this variety, there is a variation from cold desert in Ladakh and hot desert in Rajasthan to extremely arid conditions in Kutch and very heavy rainfall in Cherrapunji. In fact, world's highest rainfall is in Cherrapunji. Coming to vegetation, a major factor that determines the extent of vegetation depends on the temperature, rainfall, and humidity of the area. High temperature and humidity supports evergreen forests, while in the deserts, there is high temperature and low humidity. The areas that experience heavy rainfall have denser vegetation as compared to the areas with less rainfall. Tropical rainforest exists in the regions that have high temperature and precipitation, and this diagram is indicating that. So basically, we have got 5 forest types, which are further subdivided into various subtypes. So each of the zones that I just discussed can be further subdivided on basis of topographical variations and soil types. The composition of the soil and its capability to hold water also affects the vegetation of a region. So in all, we have got 20 zones and 79 subzones. Now zooming into one of the maps, zooming into these maps, here is a map with 5 states of Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, Uttarakhand, Punjab, and Delhi. Now, if you see here the legend, they have got parts of 5 zones and 14 subzones. Going to the next one, Gujarat, there are 4 zones, parts of 4 zones and 9 subzones. Now, if we see only one zone in detail, for example, zone 4, it is spread across these 7 states of Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, and Madhya Pradesh. So in conclusion, it would be ideal to consider zoological parks as a system of zoos pan-India. Ideally, there should be one big zoo in each of the phytogeographic zones. In case they are already present, they can be strengthened to act as support systems for other smaller zoos in that zone. Animal selection for a zoo should be in such a way that animals belonging to a certain geographic region are present in their phytogeographic zone so that the local conditions prevail and the animals are not stressed out. Other recommendations that I have written down here are that if we were able to simulate natural conditions as per the phytogeographic regions, we can not only help plants and animals which are threatened to survive in their naturalistic conditions, we also make sure that certain other smaller species of both animals and plants and microflora and fauna will also be able to thrive. The conservation aspect of the zoo should override any other objective. Some workshops can also be held or seminar for the interested students, people. There can be night camps for educational purposes. Certain animals like monkeys and many birds, aquatic animals, which are able to adapt to a wider range of climatic conditions, since they have a higher ecological amplitude, that means the higher range of tolerance. Therefore, such animals can be there in most of the zoos. Those which have narrow ecological amplitude, that means they have narrow range of tolerance, they need special care. Integrate botanical gardens for ex situ conservation of plants and zoological parks for ex situ conservation of animals. This will enable larger areas and efficient use of land and resources. Today in the digital world, we can get educated about animal life by digital means also. So informative nature documentaries, interactive online educational tools, online videos, television, etc. Major portion of the zoos can be left undisturbed for animals and visitors can be restricted to certain portions. Here, interpretation centers can play a vital role in creating awareness to visitors and create empathy for wildlife. This can also be a place where these documentaries can be played. We should stop cruelty to animals, should keep animals in zoo only for their care, breeding, and conservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you for the detailed outlining of the various design aspects for everyone to understand a holistic view to composite designing considerations. Thank you very much. I will now invite Ms. Priyanka Kanhare Patel to speak about her research work with landscape design proposals in zoos, mainly as case studies. She is an academician and a practicing architect and a landscape architect. Currently, she is a visiting faculty at the CEPT University, Faculty of Architecture, Ahmedabad, and Navrachna University, School of Environment, Design and Architecture, Vadodara. Besides this, she also conducts workshops informing ways to represent and document intangible cultural heritage of people and places. Currently, she's pursuing a PhD in landscape architecture at the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. Her research interest lies in understanding the degree of alteration in riparian vegetation along Indian rivers. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Gauri, for this introduction. I'll start sharing my screen.
Yes.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay.
You can put it in presentation, the full presentation.
Yes, I'll do that.
Please.
I'll do that. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and I'm really happy to be a part of this webinar. I'd like to start by thanking CEPT University for giving me this opportunity to present my work, and to CZA and Atal Innovation Committee, the NITI Aayog, for taking up this initiative, because I think it would be a great opportunity for young landscape architecture and design students to be a part of designing zoological parks. I'm here today to present my work related to landscape proposal for zoological park. The location that I worked on was in Vadodara, Gujarat. It was my thesis project for my master's in landscape architecture program, and I was guided by Deepa Maheshwari, Sandeep Patil, and Divya Shah. So my research began with a question: can we explore and design for the betterment of other species, which in a way would uplift our surrounding and become an integral part of people's life? So as a part of this understanding, the main design objective or agenda that I actually began with, that I began with was about designing a naturalistic zoological park where animals find more suitable habitats and visitors no longer are spectators in this experience. They are rather active participants in the scene. Sorry. Yeah. So, in order to understand the idea of zoological parks, since I had not been able to travel at a lot of places or have seen these parks, I began with a literature study where I looked at the master plans that a lot of zoos all around the world had, and also in India. So these are this is just a format of study that I did. So looking at their photographs and the master plan, each of this case study was actually sorry. Yeah. So each of this study was each of this case was actually analyzed under these components. So exhibit style, exhibit setting. So your exhibit is basically the enclosure that we talk about, as Deepa ma'am correctly mentioned about the way animals are actually, the fauna species are actually placed in the zoological parks. Exhibit furniture, vegetation, the barrier and their design, and the visitor viewing area. Based on this, they were subdivided into the feature components, and all the bands that you see in red are where these specific components are very well designed or kind of most appropriately found in the list that is mentioned here of all the parks. So as an inference from this, the design objectives that I began with were design naturalistic theme zoo, which is aesthetically pleasing, feels as if we are or the animals are in their naturalist habitat, and so that they can behave naturally. Visitors also feel that they are actually taking a walk in the forest. There is enough space for social groups to interact, and pathways which are suitable for wheelchairs, and hence the modification of contours that was eventually done for the final proposal did keep in mind all of these aspects. As a part of functional requirement, because that was also something that was extremely important when you think of a large master plan, the Nandankanan Zoological Park, which is located in India, I took that as an example, and from some other literature study, I kind of broadly categorized the areas under entrance and ticketing area, administrative zone, and public zone, which basically catered with all the requirements that people or public-centric activities involved. And exhibit zones mainly cater to the animal enclosures that, where the animals would actually be placed. And if you see the proportion, the exhibit zone was more than like up around 60% of the total area. The road and the parking was also very, very important, because there are some primary pathways which all the visitors take to move around, but there are also secondary and service pathways which are for the people who are working in these zoological parks. So based on the initial understanding, the functional requirements, and then taking the help of the CZA manuals which are available, they give an extremely detailed understanding about each of the aspects of zoological parks, starting from components that an enclosure or a zoo should have. What are the movement enrichment features? So how different features or elements could be added into the park which can enhance the animal behavior. So the behavioral enrichment components, and the one which are display components. So how the interaction between people and the fauna species starts happening. After having understood this, it was also important to understand each of the animal or the bird or the reptile that was to be placed. So I started imagining, since Jungle Book being one of my most favorite movies since childhood and even till date, I tried imagining each of the animal in a specific habitat that I'd always thought of or had looked at. So how a tiger would actually react if it's in its natural environment, how a snake, and this snake, I mean, people who have seen Jungle Book can immediately relate to it, like the way that large python is crawling on those trees. And then similarly, the lions in the Lion King, the large savanna forest that you see there and those grasslands. So a lot of these sketches and inferences started coming from there. And then while I made these sketches, I started thinking of the exhibit, that if this is the kind of view I want the visitors to have, which are the points from where they can view it? And in order to do that, what kind of plan arrangement should happen? And then, some animals needed a larger water body, some didn't, some needed certain heights. So, what kind of contours should work? So, taking help of the Caesar Day manual specifically for the sections, because they have some amazing drawings that they have put in the guidelines. The different type of sections with different mood sizes and depths were evolved. So these are a few examples of that. And then talking of aviary, like how an open aviary would work if you were actually a part of it, so that you don't see birds in cages, but they're actually moving in between the trees and the branches, and they still have some kind of a closure on the top so that they don't fly off. While I was doing this, parallelly, there were a few important things that one had to take into account, thinking of the larger master plan. So I did a gazetteer study for the city of Baroda, where I found out the original species that belong to that region. As Deepa ma'am correctly mentioned in her presentation, that you need to understand the phytozones in order to understand which animals you would then put in these zoological parks. So that detailed study was done, and I found out that there were n number of species which were earlier had their natural habitat in the region of Baroda, but because of the urban sprawl and development, a lot of their habitats have been lost. Also, the proximity from the city, since we were projecting a city level park and maybe one of its kind in Baroda, or maybe the second, would I expect people from the nearby towns also to be visiting it? So the travel radius is from the city to the outskirts. Analyzing all the natural layers like the geology, especially in respect to the soil feature, hydrology with respect to river and vegetation. Also, I did an in-depth study in calculating every exhibit area. So if a particular species was there, if they multiply or if they breed, how the large number would survive, what are the places that they would need for feeding or mating or breeding or for the recreational. So all those calculations were done, and based on that, the final master plan was proposed. Also, the fauna vulnerability status, because I did identify that there were a lot of species who had now become endangered or were or had gone extinct. So this particular factor also helps. Habitat favorable conditions for all the fauna species that eventually I proposed with respect to vegetation. And hence, if you when I'll show you my final master plan, it was basically zoned keeping in mind the biogeographical theme. Which means that the animals who survive in more of grassland or like vast grass kind of habitats were kept together, and then places where a lot of fruit trees were grown, so bears and other animals which feed on that. So vegetation type became very important. The reference of Sayaji Zoo was also taken in order to understand the visitors' footfall, since I've seen that place since my childhood, as I'm from Baroda. So understanding over 10 years what is the kind of visitors, so how many number of people am I catering to? And flood level and rainfall, especially for Baroda, because it's extremely prone to flooding and heavy rainfall. So based on all this understanding, you could see it in the key map that the proposed site was somewhere in the outskirts of the Baroda city. And the first map on the left is the zone based on the vegetation type, understanding the canopy heights and the vegetation layer. The second one talking about placing of amenities and creating primary, secondary, tertiary pathways. Each of the moat was, or each of the enclosure was designed and modified contours were done, and then overlaying all these layers and the other understanding into a conceptual master plan. So the final proposal that I had proposed was for a 200-acre master plan, and these calculations were also done keeping in mind the Caesar Day manuals. So this is the final master plan which I had proposed, and the right side is the list. So there were 40 species of fauna that were placed in this, and different pathways were kind of made. So this is just a part of the drawings. It was a hand-rendered A0 size drawing where each habitat was detailed out based on the previous studies that I showed you. And this is a section with a sectional profile that you can see at the bottom. So how the zoo and one could see that the ground slopes towards the river. So the contours had still been maintained, keeping in mind the landscape layer of geology and the soil. So minimum disturbing of the soil or the land was kind of done. Just as a part of study, and as there is a time restriction in the thesis project, I could only detail out one exhibit. So this is for an elephant. So again, the specific behavior of elephant was taken into account, understanding their movement and breeding patterns. And this particular exhibit area had defined contours with a deep moat, a water body. The dotted line in red indicates imagining how the elephant would actually move in this space. So the exhibit area where there were boulders and a lot of banana and sugarcane plantation is done, so that the animals' behavior of eating the banana leaves or the fruit and the sugarcane plants can be actually seen. And the animals have a habit, like elephants have a habit of rubbing their body against the trees. So that kind of activity also was kind of considered, and this night and feeding chambers where external food could be provided. So the pathway in orange is the service pathway where the people can come in and kind of give their food. And in the time when these animals are mating, they really need their own private space. So the left side, the smaller water body with a little rest area and breeding space is for the animal breeding and conservation part. So this was a quick glimpse of the thesis work that I had done. You can see the final report on a link in my blog. I would end the presentation on this note where I've written that man's existence depends on nature's equilibrium. If it is disturbed, it will affect human life adversely. Respecting animals' need and visitors' experience in the pre-design process is essential for the success of a final design. Zoological parks serve as a source of recreation and give knowledge to people, and a home for those who have lost their natural habitat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Priyanka, for your insights. Jungle Book is an all-time favorite for so many. Thank you for detailing the approach to designing.
Thank you.
And next speaker for the evening is Ms. Anupama Bharti, and she will talk about landscape design approach for wildlife corridors. Ms. Bharti is an assistant professor in the Department of Landscape at School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. Prior to that, she was teaching as assistant professor in the Faculty of Planning and Architecture, GCA Lucknow, and has also been a visiting faculty at the Center for Environment Planning Technology University and SAL School of Architecture, Ahmedabad, and the UPS, Dehradun. She was also practicing as a landscape consultant in Lucknow while teaching. Her research interests focused on understanding of cultural landscapes and urban open spaces in India, and how urban landscape is playing an important role in reshaping the contemporary cityscapes. Over to you, Anupama.
Thank you, Gauri, for such a wonderful, elaborate introduction. I would like to share my screen.
Yes, please.
Is it visible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
So I would like to thank you, the NITI Aayog Atal Innovation Mission and all CZA team to giving us such a wonderful opportunity to be the part of Zootopia 2021. Today I'm going to talk about landscape design approach for wildlife corridors. So I am assuming that you must have understood the forest and zoos as discussed by eminent speakers in various webinars. So to understand wildlife corridors, first you need to understand the fragmented forest, as it has already been told by Deepa ma'am. So when large forest areas are forcefully converted into smaller patches of forest, due to developmental activities by humans such as roads and highway construction, poaching and overgrazing, dependency upon the forest ecosystems, and forest products by local communities. Degradation of top population may result into conversion of large forest area into smaller patches, isolation of plants and animal population, elimination of species including top carnivores, degradation of habitats and population may lead to the human-wildlife conflicts, as you can see in the images. So these are some examples of fragmented landscapes and fragmented forests. So to understand the landscape connectivity and wildlife corridors, these fragmented forests may sometimes have a connection in the form of trees or groups of trees, bushes, grasslands, woodlands, which are critical and called wildlife corridors. These are like bridges which promote connectivity for larger and smaller habitat and ecosystems, establish linkages between protected areas, maintain stepping stones of habitat that allows wildlife to migrate, facilitate flow of nutrients and gene between separated populations. And these are the various examples of natural and artificial wildlife corridors. Now the classification of wildlife corridors based upon the landscape, function and scale. In the diagram, these are the different types of protected areas differ into the size and having the different types of habitats, maybe the similar habitats also. So landscape corridors, these are multi-directional corridors, these are large-scale linkages, cover an area up to more than 1,000 square kilometers, includes different types of landscapes such as riverine, stream systems, watershed areas, mountains, hill, different types of ecosystems, mosaics. National parks maybe fall into this category, example, Corbett National Park. Linear corridors are unidirectional small-scale linkages, cover an area up to 100 square kilometer, provide linear connectivity between small fragmented patches having similar species, restore targeted species which are on the verge of extinction. Wildlife sanctuaries may fall under this category, for example, Ken Tiger Reserve. Stepping stone corridors are the remains between the larger fragmentation in the form of woodlands, grasslands, groups of trees, which allow animal population to migrate from one habitat to another. These areas are smallest linkages. For example, the small zoos and city forest may fall under this category. For example, Kukarel Forest. Now, before independence, in UP, there were larger forest comprises of Musa Bagh Forest, Bakshi Ka Talab Forest, and Kukarel Forest. But over the period of time, due to developmental activities and increase in population, only Kukarel Forest have been left, which is now serving as the breeding center for rare species of alligator and corridors. These are the examples. So the landscape corridor of Talamanca corridor, Costa Rica, as you can see, these are the protected areas of various habitats, and these are connected by types of landscape ecosystems. And these are the examples of linear corridors, which are some artificial and natural. Now the corridor design. So after understanding of corridors, the corridor design should highly focused upon the unique requirements of the species, habitats, ecosystems, and ecological processes of concern. Understanding the objectives of corridor design, landscape level corridor design protect wide range of habitats and types of available landscape resources, and also promoting activities such as ecotourism and agricultural practices. Linear level corridor design provide harvestable resources and ecotourism, also promoting habitat and landscape connectivity as landscape scale. Stepping stone level corridor design support recreational activities and maintain specific habitat connectivity. The existing context of corridors. We must, for designing the corridors, we must understand the existing scenario of the corridors, like what are the existing conditions of natural landscapes and natural resources, what is the scale and size of the disturbed area, conditions of habitat loss and endangered species, local community participation and their dependency upon the forest products, and human settlements and their activities, Government and stakeholders involvement. This is the most important factor in designing the corridors, as how the governments are reducing the dependency upon the forest ecotourism by local communities, and how they are taking involvement in protecting these areas. And protecting focal species. After understanding the existing conditions of the objectives of the corridor design, is to protect focal species such as keystone species, flagships, and umbrella species, which may directly conserve the habitat of other wildlife animals, as these have special requirements such as ecological role, feeding behavior, habitat requirements, space use patterns, social organization, migration patterns, and dispersal ecology and patterns. Protecting communities and ecosystem may directly affect the restoration of entire ecosystem, and also beneficial for the settlements residing nearby the forest areas. Now, what are the elements of corridor design? The width of the corridor design dependent upon the level of human intrusion and natural disasters. Connectivity refers to the distances of gaps which between the width of the corridors, the sizes of the gaps, and the alternative pathways and the nodes along the corridors, as you can see in the diagrams. The habitat quality, depending upon width and connectivity, it includes the undisturbed ecosystem structures, diversity of native species, minimal human intervention. The key elements are vegetative cover, topography, and human intervention. Landscape character and feature. It is the strongly influence. It strongly influence the design of corridors, and they provides clues to appropriate corridor locations such as river and stream systems, watershed areas, mountains, hill, slopes and terrain, grasslands, specific type, and deserts. Now the applications and guidelines. To avoid introduction of invasive species to patches of high quality habitat, connectivity should be provided only those patches that were formerly connected. Identify and preserve the existing natural corridors, riparian zones, and migration routes for better flow of food and gene. For mitigating the effects of climate change, corridors should be placed along the favorable geographical locations. Redundant connections and long stretches greater than 2 kilometers without nodes should be avoided. Applying all these design considerations to the case study of Tarai landscape of India and Nepal, spans up to 1500 kilometers in length, comes under the area of conflict, as it is the transboundary of India and Nepal border, conserving by both the governments. The landscape level corridor project was designed to support the movement and survival of endangered fauna such as tiger, Asian elephants, rhinoceros, as well as protect watershed areas and support ecotourism benefit for local communities. The corridor design involved the linear level corridor linkages that linked 11 protected areas, national parks, and having total area of 34,000 square kilometers surrounded by buffer zones, compatible for dispersal and migration of large animals such as tiger and elephants. Implementation focused upon community-based restoration and designed of critical bottlenecks by planting trees and grasses. So as you can see in the diagram, these are the various protected wildlife sanctuaries and national park in India and Nepal, which are needed to be connected by the landscape corridors as well as the linear corridors. So these are the core. These are the black band are the wildlife sanctuaries and national parks, which are connected by the core protected areas in which the human intervention can happen. And these are connected by the dark gray one are the landscape corridors, and followed by the light gray are the linear corridors, which are surrounded by the buffers areas. In designing the corridors, we should avoid these kind of bottleneck areas which are very vulnerable in design. So this is how both the governments have achieved the landscape conservation of Tarai Arc landscapes of India and Nepal. So at the end, I would like to conclude, if we are sensitive enough to conserve our lives, then we must conserve and preserve the forest and wildlife, as we are dependent upon the forest, not they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Anupama. Thank you for dealing with natural habitats and wildlife corridors. It's slightly offbeat from what we've been dealing with, specifically zoos so far. It's important to remember the natural habitats and animal migrations and dispersal, not only from the perspective of enclosure habitat design when we think of zoos, but also from the perspective of education and outreach regarding habitats the animals live in, and now the pressures that the animals are facing. So thank you very much for dealing with this. Our final speaker for this evening is Ms. Richa Raje. She will talk about landscape design in zoos, helping to bridge the gap between humans and nature. She's a landscape architect and an academician, and has been associated with the Department of Landscape at School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. Prior to this, she has gathered field experience while working with Messrs. Prabhakar B. Bhagwat on various projects from inception to execution. Her area of focus lies in designing with plant material, site planning, and design development for green areas. She's currently pursuing her research on designing outdoor play spaces as learning environments and creating sustainable urban transformation models for redevelopment. She aims to bridge the gap between academic learning and the profession's pragmatic constraints. Over to you. Richa, over to you.
Thank you, Gauri, for that wonderful introduction. I'll quickly share my screen.
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. All right. So good evening, everyone. And thank you for all the authorities who have joined, who has given us this opportunity to present before, and on a very relevant topic of zoo design. Most of the fundamental bases have already been covered in the previous presentations. And let's see what I can bring on the table. This presentation would majorly focus on the role of designer, scope and potential that can help in creating stimulating experiences for both users and the animals, and how to create lasting connections between people and nature. Before we try to get answers for this, I think we need to familiarize ourselves with the concept of landscape immersion, which talks about nature being the best model, and it tries to place the user and the animals in the similar environmental conditions. There are certain elements, design elements for our understanding for designing landscape immersion. And one of them is landscape simulation, which talks about creating exact similar natural setting or habitat so that the animal behaves natural and find himself in a very familiar condition. The landscape needs to be continuous rather than being caged or being under hard boundaries, and it helps the user as well as the animal to interact with each other. Consistent habitat, subtle transitions, elements which are not conducive to the environment needs to be replaced. We need to try to engage and engross the user in larger landscape settings. It needs to be biocentric, and one needs to understand that this is a place where human being becomes part of the larger landscape. So how do designers create spaces which can make animals natural habitat? Now, this is where designers today are experimenting and thinking beyond immersion. Yes, of course, it is about understanding the biogeographic zone, understanding the context, understanding the indigenous species, and replicating true habitat, but also ensuring that the viewers get the best possible exposure to look at these species. And hence, it lays its principle by emphasizing their uniqueness, their beauty, offering multiple viewpoints or angles without disturbing or encroaching to their natural living conditions. It is also about creating exciting circulation experience, which in itself becomes engaging for the users. But it also controls the movement, but also allows for best possible views and blurred boundaries. If we look at certain facilities like this deck that you can see, it is located in Spain in an ornithological observatory. It is completely hidden. It draws its inspiration from a bird's nest and allows for play of light and shade. Also containing the viewers who are actually going to who are going to watch the birds. There are several low impact to development strategies like these movement trails that allows for circulation, but does not allow to touch the ground. And with thick vegetation tries to keep oneself camouflaged throughout. There are furthermore ancillary facilities like kids playground that are associated with zoo setting, and it allows a very natural theme. It developed in a natural theme. It will allow all the kids to play with natural elements, which otherwise they would not get in their urban environments. Nature interpretation centers, they can become the storehouse or information exchange centers. They allow for audiovisual tours, exhibition spaces. They allow for holding labs and research that is related to animals and monitoring them and surveilling them. It allows also for spreading awareness. And there are petting zoos that can be a great tool to develop emotions and connect with kids and other caregivers for these kind of animals. There are several projects having, trying to deal with direct interaction and one can say a higher degree of affordance of all the activities that can happen over here, and both can benefit from each other. While we are learning about getting in closer and closer to these animals, the behavioral ecology actually tells that the animals adapt to their environment and inspire the users to do the same. So how does a holistic approach to design can help in guiding the sustainable city? So this is where we need to actually draw learnings from our zoos. So if you look at our zoo, it works with a mission of creation, it works with an idea of creation, it works with an idea of sustainability. It is more than a checklist. It is not an inventory of animals or plants. Most of the time signifies that the animal along with the entire plant setting along, which actually qualifies to become its ecosystem, is actually important. And that ensures the rich diversity of these species. It can also give clues of how to conserve natural resources and become a guiding principle for future cities. And we need to join several such dots together to come up with an idea of a future development. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can. You can go to the next slide, please.
I'm unable to change my slide. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So, okay. So here is where I would like to take the liberty to digress from the topic and draw your attention to some of the real-time challenges in statistics while we are trying to create a harmonious and joyous, balanced environment. Our immediate worry is to accommodate into our living conditions. This is a report that has come from World Economic Forum 2000, all the global risks and biodiversity.
We kind of lost Richa.
Gargi, can you move the slides? Maybe you can steer it.
Hello.
Yes, we have got you back.
Yes. Yes, we got
Yeah.
you back. Can you just share, like, change
Yeah,
your screen?
I'll just share it again.
Yeah.
Can you see my slide?
Not yet. Otherwise, if you have any technical issue, we can share it from here. Yeah, we can see now.
All right. So I'm so sorry for the
Yeah,
inconvenience.
you can turn
So
off
now
your
we are-
camera if that it's okay. Yeah, for the internet issue, etc.
Thank you. Okay. So this is a World Economic Forum report, and it maps the global risks, and biodiversity loss comes under the top 5 risks. Even though we occupy 0.01% of the living creatures, we have been able to cause damage to loss of around 83% of all the wild mammals and more than half of the plants. Most of our produces modern drugs actually come from natural products, and 80% of our oxygen actually comes from the oceans. Human activity has endangered biodiversity in several ways because of altered land uses, because of overexploitation, uncontrolled pollution, introduction of non-indigenous species, and everything then further leads to the climate change. It's a vicious circle because all of these processes are interrelated to each other. There is, if we look at Indian scenario is no good, and we are striving for open spaces in our cities, and forget about creating green spaces. We hardly have spaces to accommodate human population. So there is a need for paradigm shift. Juan from University of Malacca says that actions carried out to preserve ecosystem functioning will last longer than the actions towards protecting individual species. And natural history is actually human history. Conserving biodiversity is not about finding places without human being, but it is about conserving the biodiverse cultural associations which have shaped and sustained landscapes. So the problem is not human beings actually using the spaces or green area. The problem is the kind of values that we are right now surrounded by. So what if our cities are actually the stirrers of biodiverse habitats? So benefits, if we talk about the benefits of biodiversity in our cities, it is about preserving the local species and ecology. It is about creating several stepping stones. It is about creating, imparting education. It is about ecosystem services, controlling natural disasters. It is about improving the overall well-being. So what here becomes the designer's potential? When we look at a micro scale, we are talking about zoology, talking about several zones. We're talking about conserving wildlife, creating experiential trails. It's several recreational possibilities. We're trying to create the spaces of refuge in dense urban settings. While we try to step outside and look from a larger perspective, I think we are going to talk about ecological corridors or greenways or natural systems, natural larger connections from one open space to the other, or connecting defragmented landscapes together. We are going to talk about the possibility of having animal corridors, crossovers, and something that has other benefits like groundwater flood resilience, and exchange of genetic material between different animals. If we further try to step outside and look at it from a larger perspective, we are at macro scale. What if our cities were actually designed to accommodate forests and nests, urban settings, and nests us? So there is this example that is by Green in Madrid, which is trying to create a metropolitan forest. So it is trying to create several regional linkages of the city forest to the surrounding areas. Singapore, which was once known as City of Garden, is right now trying to transform itself from City of Garden to City of Nature, from a very exclusive environment to a very integrated and inclusive environment, from something which is introvert to something which is very bold and extrovert. Why not design or try and work with the idea of making human landscapes more wildlife friendly? Because nature is everybody's business and everybody can contribute. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Richa. The primary focus for all us zoo professionals is to establish a connect between the zoo visitor and the animals. Petting zoos within our zoos are not currently permitted, but you elaborated the journey from the role of designers, the scope, the potential to move from anthropocentric to biocentric facilities very beautifully. So thank you very much. I will now open the platform for questions, and we already have some. So I will address all you speakers individually with one question each. So if you could please turn on your cameras where possible. Deepa ma'am, the first question is for you. Why do you think that landscape design is important while planning or designing a zoo? Could you give us one focus point for this?
See, when we are designing zoo, what we are talking about in landscape is the natural layers of the land. So even doing site planning or understanding what the land has to offer us, we need to understand everything about the landscape of the site. Then only we can do planning. So in my presentation, I have already shared that when we do analysis, we do layers of geology, soil, topography, and all those things. And then we put them together and then try to understand what the site is suitable for. So for example, when we are talking about zoo, there are certain animals which need rocky areas. There are certain animals which need, water and water side, and soil moisture should be good. So if we just understand the kind of small micro habitats that are there or can be created, our landscape can be used, the landscape knowledge can be used extensively to understand what is there on the site and how you can use it and modulate it.
So start ground up.
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Priyanka, the next question is for you. What is the single most key element or principle that one should consider while designing a zoo? According to you, what is the single most key principle?
I think, one that already ma'am said is the key point. But if we talk about planning, I think what one can take care of is how much do they really involve the visitor in the whole process of moving around the space. Because, we have always had this notion that we go to these zoological parks to enjoy and see animals. And there is always, even when we go to wildlife sanctuaries, we are like, oh, we didn't see a tiger, oh, we didn't spot a lion. So is that really necessary? Like, you are there to see them. You may spot them, you may not spot them. But what you are trying to understand is that there is a certain way that they live. There's a certain habitat that they live in. Now, in a forest, it's hard to find and see it. the parks are the best example to do that. So I think that communication, that as a landscape architect, what you design, or as a botanist, if that really gets communicated to the visitors, then I think the whole motive of doing this zoological park design is, I think that's the potential of it then.
So a good message through design. Perfect. Thank you. Anupama, next question for you. Do you think zoos can act as ecological niches? If so, what are the key elements that zoos need to recognize and then focus on?
Okay, yes, of course, zoo can be work as ecological niches, and the key the basic key elements we need to focus upon the habitats, as already discussed by the eminent speakers. What are the habitats of animals, and what are the landscape spaces that habitats actually required? Maybe the characters of the landscapes, maybe the varieties of trees are there, the varieties of materials are there, the varieties of the different habitats, which, like, there is a different types of landscape spaces required by the elephants, and there are different types of landscape required by the peacock. So different elements, landscape spaces are required to design a zoo. So yes, we can say that the zoo as definitely work as an ecological niche. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. The last question that we have is for Richa. Considering the current pandemic situation, how can we bridge the gap between animals and humans from the design perspective?
It's a tough question. I mean, considering pandemic where we are not actually allowed to explore outside. But yes, in these trying times, I think open spaces is something that we have realized the importance of, and I think the other way to be able to associate ourselves with immediate greens and immediate open spaces and immediate areas that we can actually afford to have, and that those systems have to be then, integrated in our planning as not merely for recreation, but also taking the responsibility of becoming the pollinators, attracting the pollinators, attracting certain kind of birds, certain kinds of other animals. And I think they will then become, yes, stepping stones, but yes, it comes with a certain limitation, of course.
Thank you so much. A big thank you to all the speakers that we've had this evening. It's been quite an amazing diversity of topics that have been covered, so much information that has been given out to everyone. A very big thank you to all of you. We can take a 2-minute break now, and if the speakers have other things to do, you're welcome to leave, or we will be happy for you to stay on as well. I will now request Gargi to make any further announcements regarding the competition and then steer a walkthrough of the competition website and application link.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everybody, for joining this webinar session. To go further, I would like to announce that because we have received so many requests from several participants and interested students who would like to participate in this competition, we have kind of extended the deadline. So good news for all. And we have extended this deadline for 7th of June. This is like the formal announcement for all the keen participants and also for the faculties who have joined this session. So this is the AIIMS website. This is a homepage where you will see the banner. So once you click the banner, it will straight away take you to the competition website where you have the final kind of a deadline saying that this is the 7th June is the application deadline, and you have all the details of the Zootopia 2021. At the bottom part, you will see 3 tabs. You will find the competition files. So the competition files have all the data related to the drawings, the DXF files, the images of your proposal, the design proposal, like the case references you can take. The guidelines are there for in the second tab, and in the application tab, once you click it, it will take you to the, I think it's taking some time for me to load. So once you go to this page, this is a page where you can register. You can put your email ID, password, and a code will generate from here. The one important thing that I would like to mention here, for any kind of queries you have related to this competition or the competition brief, or you want any kind of clarification, please mail us on this website. This is the contact detail, aim.challenges@gov.in. So we'll be more than happy to answer all your queries. So I think that's all. So just to finally mention again to everybody, so the application deadline now has been extended for Zootopia, and it's on 7th of June. So we will look forward to all the interesting proposals. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Gargi. Have a good evening, everybody, and look forward to more participation in all our endeavors from here on forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gauri.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
ma'am.
Thank you all for this
Everyone.
wonderful
Thank you, Gauri.
opportunity. Yeah, thank you. Bye bye. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.